Many of us grew up with Nintendo consoles and Nintendo games, whether it's a Pokémon Yellow on the Game Boy or Mario Odyssey on a Nintendo Switch. Nintendo games have always been popular and have influenced generations of people. Therefore, it sometimes happens that Nintendo inspires fans to start their own fan projects for Nintendo games. However, these are not welcome and are usually stopped directly by a cease and desist letter. In this video, I would like to show you some of the most ambitious fan projects that unfortunately got taken down soon after launching. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask are true classics of the Nintendo 64 era, and many fan theories surround the stories of the two games and how they are connected. One attempt to explain this connection was made by the well-known modder Case Imanua, whom you may know from Super Mario 64 hacks such as Super Mario 64 Last Impact or Super Mario 64 3D World. In 2020, Imanua released a fan game called The Missing Link, which used the same engine as Ocarina of Time and tried to explain what had happened between the two games. In the game, however, there was not only a completely new story to experience, but also new dungeons, cutscenes, music, and items. The game was about a quarter as long as Majora's Mask, but according to Imanua, they were trying to create a game that had the same quality as Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, so it was a really elaborate process. However, this elaborate process was probably not worth it in the end, as it resulted in a cease and desist letter from Nintendo, a few months after the game's release. The game, which was made available for free via GitHub, had to be removed from the platform on the 13th October 2020. Even though The Missing Link was only available for a short time, at least some fans were still able to play it, and videos of the game can still be found on YouTube today. What does your dream Pokémon game look like? Many fans have long wanted to be able to travel to all regions in a Pokémon game. In the second generation, it was actually possible to go back to the Kanto region, but this idea was not kept in the following generations. If the developers won't do it, we'll do it ourselves, thought the developers of the Pokémon fan project Pokenet. Pokenet was a Pokémon MMO that launched in 2009. Pokémon fans were able to travel to the first two regions, the Kanto region and the Johto region, and trade and battle Pokémon with players from all over the world. Since Pokenet was an MMO, you could also see other players' characters in the region and talk to them via a chat function, so it felt much more alive. Initially, only the first two generations were available, but the other regions were to be added over time. In the end, however, it never came to that, because Nintendo took legal action against the project and the development had to be stopped. Pokenet apparently had about 7,000 active players at the time, and one of the developers, Nushio, was very surprised that Nintendo had sent a cease and desist letter. In an interview with Joystick, he said that there were many other Pokémon MMOs, but they weren't open source, so that may have been the reason for the legal action. In the same interview, he also said that he didn't know what would happen to the project in the future, but that many members of the team had simply given up. Because there have been many other Pokémon MMOs since then, some of which are still active today, the cease and desist letter for Pokenet seems a bit arbitrary, but it would still be cool to get a Pokémon MMO where you can travel to all regions someday. The Wii U was a big flop, but some of its games had a lot of potential. One of those games is Super Mario Maker. Super Mario Maker came out at a time when the new Super Mario Bros. Series was already a bit stale. Oftentimes the same ideas were used, and for many fans there was simply a lack of innovation. Super Mario Maker was the perfect remedy for this, because in this game, fans could simply take over the level building process themselves, and the levels could not only be built, but of course also be shared worldwide, so that every player had millions of levels to choose from. This brilliant idea may not have been Nintendo's own, however, at least if the developer of FullScreenMario is to be believed. This game is a version of the original Mario Bros. Game, which had a level generator for randomly generated levels and also a level editor. The browser game, which was developed by Josh Goldberg, was released in January 2013, but only received greater attention in October 2013, when a blogger talked about the game. Shortly after, FullScreenMario.com was visited daily by about 300,000 people, who came to the website to enjoy the game. However, this great attention was also noticed by Nintendo, so that it had to be removed in November 2013. At that time, it had been played about 2.7 million times. The game's code was still available on GitHub though, so that the game was still actively being developed despite the legal steps. Nintendo therefore decided 3 years later, in May 2016, to also take down the game's code on GitHub, so that the project would end once and for all. But since the game is still playable on some websites, websites today, it seems that this didn't quite work out either. The fact that Goldberg had to end the project at the end of 2013 was not necessarily a coincidence, since Nintendo announced Super Mario Maker for the Wii U a few months later. Goldberg thinks it's a possibility that Mario Maker was inspired by his idea. I think it's too much of a coincidence that in the fall they take down a fan site that was too popular for them, then in the spring and summer they release a trailer for this product, he said in an interview with Washington Post. But the whole thing also had a good ending for Goldberg, as he got many job offers because of the project, and now works as a software developer for Microsoft. It seems that sometimes making a fan game can also have its advantages. Speaking of Mario Maker, there's also a fan who wanted to apply the Mario Maker idea to another game series, The Legend of Zelda. Developer Justin Sink developed a Zelda Maker, where players could easily create their own areas and dungeons using elements from Zelda games. At a push of a button, it was easily possible to place the elements known from 2D Zelda games in a landscape and play your own creations. The game, which was developed in Game Maker, was released in 2015, but disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Nintendo took legal action and work on Zelda Maker could not continue, but that didn't stop the developer from continuing the project. The developer renamed the game to Runia and replaced the Zelda assets with new ones, so that it has now become a completely original game. Similarities to the classic 2D Zelda titles can still be seen, and the developer still promotes it as a Zelda-like game, but at least there don't seem to be any legal problems anymore. Pokémon hacks are a dime a dozen, but when the fan game Pokémon Uranium was released in 2016, the excitement for it was certainly huge. The game had been in development for more than 9 years, and was meant to be a love letter to the Game Boy era. It featured 8 gyms and 13 cities, as well as more than 190 Pokémon, almost all of which were completely new. It also added the completely new nuclear type, which also plays a very important role in the story. The game was an incredible success at the time, and almost every Pokémon fan who was on the internet had heard about it. Within the first week, it had already been downloaded about 1.5 million times, which was certainly good news for the developers, but not so much for Nintendo. 1 week after its launch, Nintendo took legal action, and the developers were notified by Nintendo's lawyers. The download link was then removed from their website, and the project was dead. This is one of the most ambitious fan projects, and you could really tell how much work and love went into the whole project. So it's a shame that it only lasted a week, but the game definitely left a lasting impression, so that even today, 6 years later, it is still considered one of the best Pokémon fan games of all time. Another Metroid 2 remake, also known as AM2R, is probably the most famous example of a fan game that Nintendo stopped via DMCA. This game was a remake of Metroid 2, developed by programmer Milton Dr. M64 Guasti. In this remake, Metroid 2 was updated with color, and also given a similar visual style as Super Metroid. In addition, the gameplay was also updated a bit, to make it more modern and accessible. After more than 10 years of development, the game was released on the 6th August 2016. The 30th anniversary of the game series. Guasti had intended to improve the game over time via updates, but it never got that far in the end, as Nintendo wasn't necessarily a fan of this, well, fan project. The game only survived a single day and had to be removed from websites on August 7th. Since Metroid fans hadn't gotten a new installment in 6 years at that point, and the previously announced Metroid Prime Federation Force didn't exactly make the best impression, and that's putting it kindly, fans were a bit disappointed with Nintendo's approach. Fortunately though, fans didn't have to wait much longer for a good Metroid game, as Nintendo themselves had a remake of the exact same game in the works. In 2017, they released their very own Metroid 2 remake, which got praised by both the media and gamers around the world. That the fan remake was not entirely in vain, however, is evident from discussions surrounding the game, where to this day people still debate who ultimately did it better, Nintendo or Dr. M64.